The storm swept across the prairie like a living thing, flattening grass and rattling the shingles of a cabin that stood stubborn against the elements. Inside, Elias Harper sat hunched at a wooden table worn smooth from years of use. His right arm rested in a crude sling, bound close to his chest, the muscles wasted from months of disuse. A lantern burned low, its glow flickering across his weathered face, shadowing the scar carved above his brow. Once he had been known for his strength, a rancher who could wrestle a steer or break a wild horse. Now he was reduced to silence and stillness, listening to rain pound the roof while his world grew smaller each day. At his feet lay Scout, a shepherd mix whose ears had been torn in some forgotten fight. The dog's amber eyes fixed on Elias with a steady patience, as though willing him not to collapse beneath his burdens. Every so often, Scout nudged Elias's boot with his muzzle, a silent reminder that despair was not solitude. Outside the cabin walls, Ashfire stood restless in the corral, mane slicked to his neck by the driving rain. The Mustang had been rescued from a tangle of poachers' ropes months earlier, and though scars laced his flanks, he carried himself with unbroken defiance. Tonight he pawed at the earth, ears pricked toward the storm, as if he sensed some threat greater than thunder. Elias rubbed the bridge of his nose with his good hand, trying to quiet the ache inside his chest. The accident had stolen more than his strength. It had stripped him of pride, of purpose. He remembered the day his arm was crushed beneath a falling beam, the weight of his ranch collapsing both literally and figuratively around him. Since then, work had gone unfinished, debts unpaid, and neighbors who once nodded with respect now whispered about weakness. He had no family left to stand at his side. Only the dog and the horse remained, bound to him by something deeper than choice. The lantern flame sputtered as wind whistled through the cracks in the doorframe. Scout stiffened, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Elias lifted his gaze, puzzled, until the sound of hooves carried faintly through the storm. Not the wild clatter of strays, but the deliberate rhythm of riders. He pushed back from the table, heart hammering. Through the narrow window he glimpsed fire moving across the horizon, torches weaving against the rain. 3 figures emerged from the dark, their shapes shifting as they drew nearer. Ashfire answered with a shrill cry, rearing against the fence, hooves striking sparks from stone. Scout pressed closer to the door, hackles raised. Elias reached instinctively for the rifle propped against the wall, only to curse under his breath when the weight of it reminded him of his useless arm. He could not shoulder the stock. He could hardly steady it. Yet the riders were still advancing, their torches glowing brighter against the curtain of rain. For a moment he considered retreat, closing shutters, pretending no one was home. But the thought died as quickly as it came. Men who carried torches in a storm did not ride for conversation. They rode for claim, for intimidation, for blood if need be. Elias steadied himself, hand brushing the dog's head. "Easy, Scout," he whispered, though his own voice trembled. The riders slowed as they reached the yard, dismounting with careless arrogance. Their laughter carried over the storm, low and sharp. Scout snarled, teeth flashing in the lantern glow. Ashfire struck the fence again, his body a wall of fury against the intruder's approach. Elias gripped the rifle anyway, cradling it awkwardly against his side, every muscle in his body tight with the knowledge that he could not win if this came to a fight. Rain hammered the earth as the torchlight painted the cabin walls in shifting gold. The lead figure stepped forward, boots sinking into the mud, his voice harsh and certain. Elias swallowed hard, spine straightening despite the weight of his broken body. In that moment, with his dog pressed against him and his Mustang crying defiance into the night, he realized there was no retreat left. Whatever storm had come to claim him had arrived at his very door, and he would have to face it. Mud clung to the boots of the men as they stepped closer, torchlight glimmering against the wet boards of the cabin. The leader, broad-shouldered with a ragged beard, raised his torch higher, his eyes cold beneath the brim of his hat. His two companions flanked him, lean men with the look of jackals, their grins wide as if the storm itself had been staged for their arrival. Elias Harper stood in the doorway, rifle pressed awkwardly against his side, the sling binding his bad arm a bitter reminder of his helplessness. Scout growled low, body tense, while Ashfire reared once more in the corral, his cry tearing through the storm like a warning. "Well, look at him," the leader said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Rancher without cattle, man without strength. You should have known better than to think this land would stay yours." He jabbed the torch toward the cabin. "By tomorrow it's ours. Debt don't forgive weakness." Elias forced his voice steady though the weight of it trembled in his throat. "This land is mine. My sweat, my blood, it built what you see. You'll not take it by threats." His grip tightened on the rifle, though he knew he could not raise it quickly enough if they charged. Scout barked, sharp and furious, the sound echoing into the storm. The second man laughed, stepping close enough that Elias could smell the whiskey on his breath. "That mutt'll be the first thing I shoot when I return. Then we'll see how brave you feel." His words dripped poison, but his eyes betrayed unease as Scout bared his teeth, every muscle taut as a drawn bow. Ashfire slammed his hooves into the corral again, the fence shuddering under his weight. The Mustang's wild defiance was a spectacle none of the intruders had expected. Even the leader's smirk faltered for a heartbeat. Elias shifted his weight, forcing himself not to retreat though the fear coiled tight in his stomach. "You'll leave now," he said, voice rough. "And you won't come back." The leader's grin returned, colder this time. He leaned closer, torchlight flickering across the scarred planes of Elias's face. "We'll come back with fire, old man. We'll come back when your mutt sleeps and your horse tires. And when the ash settles, this place will be ours." He spat into the mud, the sound louder than thunder in that charged silence. Then, as suddenly as they had come, the three men turned, mounting their horses with practiced ease. Their torches dipped as the rain pressed harder, and soon their silhouettes vanished into the storm. Elias stood frozen in the doorway, his good hand still locked around the rifle stock. Scout pressed against his leg, panting, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. Ashfire tossed his head, nostrils flaring, as though daring the night to deliver its threats. The storm thundered on, but the air inside the yard felt strangely hollow, emptied of everything except the echo of those words. "We'll come back with fire." He staggered back inside, setting the rifle against the table. His chest burned with the helplessness he had tried to conceal. Scout limped close, resting his head on Elias's knee, a steady warmth against the cold creeping into his bones. Elias stroked the dog's battered ears with his good hand, whispering almost to himself, "I can't fight them." The words tasted like defeat, but Scout's steady gaze refused to mirror surrender. Outside, Ashfire pawed the ground, rain sheeting off his dark coat, eyes gleaming like embers in the lantern glow. The horse's defiance was a reminder of something Elias had nearly forgotten. Survival was not measured only in strength, but in will. He rose from the chair, shoulders sagging but spirit not yet broken, and looked from dog to Mustang. "If they come back," he said quietly, "we stand together." The storm howled against the walls, rattling windows, but for the first time that night, Elias felt the faintest thread of resolve tighten in his chest. Alone he could not win, but with Scout and Ashfire, perhaps there was still a chance. Midnight came heavy with silence, the storm dwindling to a steady drizzle that hissed against the smoldering earth. Elias stirred from uneasy sleep at the acrid scent of smoke. His eyes snapped open, heart thundering as Scout's sharp bark shattered the stillness. Flames licked along the barn's roof, their glow staining the sky a violent orange. The men had returned, just as promised, and they had brought fire. Elias stumbled to the door, pain shooting through his bad arm as he braced against the frame. Scout lunged past him, barking with a fury that seemed to shake the ground itself. Beyond the yard, figures darted between shadows, torches arcing like serpents. Ashfire reared, bursting free from the corral as though the flames themselves had cut him loose. His hooves struck sparks on stone, his wild cry a clarion against the night. The barn timbers groaned, sparks flying as the fire clawed upward. Elias staggered forward, rifle in his good hand, though he knew the weight was more burden than weapon. One of the intruders advanced, pistol raised, eyes gleaming with cruel delight. Before Elias could lift the stock, Scout hurled himself at the man, teeth sinking into his arm. The pistol fired into the sky, thunder cracking above the barn as the man screamed and fell. Another attacker swung a blade, the steel catching Scout's side, leaving a streak of red against his gray coat. The dog yelped but did not let go, jaws locked until the man tore free, stumbling back into the mud. Ashfire thundered across the yard, muscles coiled with raw power. He struck the second intruder squarely, sending him sprawling with the weight of hooves that had once carried him through storms unbroken. Elias coughed, smoke searing his throat as he dragged himself toward the barn. Sparks rained down, searing holes into his shirt. Scout limped to his side, blood streaking his fur, but his body pressed firm against Elias's leg, guiding him forward. Ashfire wheeled back, placing himself between Elias and the third man, who raised a rifle with shaking hands. Time slowed. Elias saw the barrel gleam, saw the sneer on the man's face, saw the inevitability of defeat creeping toward him. His fingers tightened on the rifle, though he knew he could not fire in time. The shot cracked. He shut his eyes, breath caught in his chest. But when the silence returned, he was still standing. Scout growled beside him, teeth bared though his body trembled. Ashfire had surged forward at the last heartbeat, his hooves pinning the gunman to the ground. The rifle clattered useless into the mud. The man gasped beneath the Mustang's weight, terror plain in his eyes. For a moment Elias thought Ashfire might crush him entirely, the fury of untamed years burning in his gaze. Yet the horse held steady, not striking, only holding, as though awaiting Elias's command. The barn roared, flames tearing free into the night sky, but the men who had come to destroy him were scattered and broken. One crawled into the shadows, clutching his bleeding arm. Another limped after him, face white with shock. The last lay pinned, too terrified to move until Ashfire snorted and stepped back, allowing him to flee into the rain. Elias collapsed to his knees, lungs heaving, vision blurred with smoke and exhaustion. Scout pressed against him, panting raggedly, his fur hot with blood. Elias's good hand trembled as it stroked the dog's battered head. Ashfire circled back, sides heaving, his coat streaked with soot and rain. For a moment the three of them stood together in the ruin of the night. Man, dog, and Mustang, bound not by ownership but by survival. The fire hissed as the storm returned, rain beating down with renewed strength. Sparks dimmed, wood blackened, the barn collapsing in on itself with a final shudder. Elias's chest ached with loss, yet beneath it ran a current of something fierce, something alive. They had not yielded. They had not broken. Scout leaned heavily against him. Ashfire lowered his head close enough for Elias's trembling hand to find the coarse warmth of his mane, and in that trinity of loyalty he felt a truth take root. Alone he was lost, but together they might endure whatever storms still waited beyond the horizon. Dawn crept across the prairie like a slow exhale. The storm spent, the sky washed clean and tender. Smoke curled from the blackened husk of the barn, its timbers groaning softly as if mourning what had been lost. Elias stood in the yard, his body aching, clothes streaked with ash, but his spine straighter than it had been in months. Scout leaned against his leg, bandaged with a strip torn from Elias's own shirt, his sides still trembling, but his eyes fierce and unyielding. Ashfire prowled the perimeter of the yard, nostrils flaring, mane tangled, every step declaring that the night had not broken him. For a long time Elias said nothing. He simply watched the horizon bleed gold, the world reborn after fire. The wind tugged at his coat, carrying with it the sharp scent of rain-damp earth and smoke. His land looked smaller now without the barn, but in the pale light it no longer seemed like a place of failure. It was ground defended, ground earned. He reached down, his good hand resting on Scout's battered head. The dog lifted his eyes, weary but steadfast, as though asking no reward beyond the simple knowledge that they still stood together. Footsteps stirred behind him, soft at first, then gathering into a small crowd. Neighbors drawn by the fire's glow had come, faces shadowed with concern and curiosity. Elias stiffened, unused to being seen except as the husk of what he once was. Yet as they stepped into the yard, their eyes did not hold pity. They lingered instead on the dog who still pressed forward despite his wounds, on the Mustang whose scar seemed carved from defiance itself, and finally on Elias, who had not fled when the fire came. Whispers rippled, carrying tones of respect that had been absent for so long. One man, gray-bearded and stern, removed his hat, heard the racket, saw the flames, thought we'd find a graveyard. His gaze shifted from Elias to Scout and Ashfire. Didn't reckon on finding a stand worth telling. Another nodded, voice low but steady. You fought them off, with these two at your side. The words settled on Elias's shoulders not as a burden, but as a mantle, a recognition he had not believed he deserved. Elias found his voice, raw and halting. I didn't stand alone. They saved me. His hand tightened in Ashfire's mane as the horse lowered his head beside him. This land's still mine because of them. There was no bravado in his tone, only truth. The neighbors exchanged looks, and in those glances Elias saw something shift. Perhaps they had come expecting to measure a man's ruin. Instead they had found resilience, stitched together by loyalty. The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving offerings behind. Waterskins, blankets, a promise to help rebuild. Elias did not ask for it, but he did not turn it away either. He knew the night had changed more than the shape of his land. It had rekindled a trust he thought gone forever. As the last neighbor departed, Elias sank to his knees in the damp grass. Scout limped into his arms, pressing his head against Elias's chest, eyes closing as though safe at last. Ashfire stood close, the warmth of his breath misting against Elias's shoulder. With his good hand Elias cradled them both, his throat tight with unspoken gratitude. You saved me, he whispered, the words breaking into the air like prayer. Neither dog nor Mustang replied, yet their silence carried a weight heavier than speech. A promise that as long as they breathed, he would never face the darkness alone again. The sun rose higher, painting the scarred earth in hues of fire and gold. The ruin of the barn no longer looked like an ending but a beginning. Elias rose, Scout pressed against his leg, Ashfire circling to his other side. Together they faced the horizon, their silhouettes etched against the morning light. Broken man no longer, Elias stood not as a figure of loss, but as the center of a bond unbroken by storm or fire. And though the prairie lay quiet, he knew the world beyond still held threats, still whispered of trials yet to come. But with a loyal dog and a wild Mustang at his side, Elias no longer feared what waited on the horizon.